Marcus Sterling stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, watching the city sprawl beneath him like a complex mathematical equation. His fingers traced invisible patterns on the glass, following the flow of traffic 40 stories below. Predictable, measurable, controlled. Just the way he liked everything in his life. The Wall Street Journal had just published another glowing profile about him. The algorithm whisperer, they called him. The man who could predict market trends with uncanny accuracy, who had turned a modest inheritance into a billion-dollar empire through pure analytical prowess. Marcus allowed himself a small smile, the kind that barely disturbed the precisely trimmed edges of his salt and pepper beard. "Mr. Sterling," his assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "The board is waiting in the conference room." Marcus straightened his already impeccable tie and gathered his tablet. Today's presentation would be another masterclass in strategic thinking. He had spent weeks perfecting the probability models, calculating every possible scenario. Success, after all, was just a matter of eliminating variables. The boardroom fell silent as he entered. 12 pairs of eyes followed his movement to the head of the table, where he connected his tablet to the display system. The quarterly projections appeared on the screen, a beautiful symphony of charts and graphs that told the story of their next triumph. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus began, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had never been wrong, "the numbers don't lie. Our new investment strategy will yield a minimum 30% return within the first quarter." He moved through the presentation with surgical precision, addressing every potential concern before it could be raised. This was his element, the perfect blend of data and persuasion. By the end, even the most skeptical board members were nodding in agreement. "Brilliant as always, Marcus," said James Morrison, the eldest board member. "But have you considered the human factor? The market isn't just numbers." Marcus's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his steel-gray eyes. "The human factor, James, is simply chaos that hasn't been properly quantified. Every decision, every emotion can be reduced to predictable patterns. That's why we succeed where others fail." The meeting concluded with unanimous approval for his strategy. As the board members filed out, Marcus remained behind, making minor adjustments to his models. The sun had set by the time he finished, casting long shadows across the empty conference room. His phone buzzed with a message from his doctor's office, another reminder about his annual physical. Marcus dismissed it with a swipe. He had calculated his health risks down to the decimal point, maintained a perfect diet and exercise regimen. Medical checkups were just a formality. The drive home in his meticulously maintained Tesla was precisely 27 minutes long. He used this time to review market reports through his car's audio system, absorbing information that would give him an edge in tomorrow's trades. Every minute was an opportunity for optimization. His mansion greeted him with programmed lighting and the perfect temperature. No surprises, no variables. The house staff had already departed for the day, leaving him alone in his carefully curated world. Marcus moved through his evening routine with practiced efficiency. Exactly 45 minutes of exercise, a perfectly portioned dinner, 30 minutes of meditation focused on market visualization. Later, as he stood in his home office reviewing the day's performance metrics, a small alert appeared on his screen. A competitor had made an unexpected move in the Asian markets. Most would see it as a minor deviation, but Marcus knew better. In the world of high finance, small ripples could become tsunamis. He spent the next 3 hours adjusting his models, accounting for this new variable. The work energized him. This was what he lived for, the intellectual challenge of bringing chaos into order. By the time he finished, the potential threat had been transformed into another opportunity for profit. Looking at his watch, Marcus noted it was well past midnight. He had deviated from his usual schedule, but sometimes perfection required flexibility. Within reasonable parameters, of course. Tomorrow would be another day of calculations, predictions, and control. As he prepared for bed, Marcus caught his reflection in the bathroom. Mirror. At 45, he looked exactly as a successful CEO should, fit, distinguished, and completely in command. His life was a testament to the power of rational thinking over emotional impulse. He had never married, never had children. Such attachments were unnecessary variables in his equation for success. The last thing he did before sleep was check his portfolio one final time. The numbers glowed reassuringly in the darkness of his bedroom. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Everything was under control. Marcus Sterling closed his eyes, satisfied with another day of perfect order in an imperfect world. Little did he know that the universe was about to throw him a variable that no algorithm could predict, no model could contain, and no amount of control could prevent. The morning began like any other in Marcus Sterling's perfectly ordered world. His smart home system activated at precisely 5:30 a.m., gradually increasing the lighting while playing his carefully selected morning playlist, Bach's well-tempered clavier, chosen for its mathematical precision. He had just finished his morning meditation when his phone buzzed with an urgent message from the office. Major market fluctuation in European trading. Emergency board meeting called for 7 a.m. Marcus's lips curved into a slight smile. He had predicted this possibility 3 months ago and had already prepared contingency plans. This was why he succeeded where others failed. He never left anything to chance. He dressed quickly in one of his identical charcoal suits, selected with scientific precision for its psychological impact in high-pressure situations. The morning air was crisp as he stepped out of his house, briefcase in hand. His driver, Thomas, held the car door open with practiced efficiency. Marcus had hired him specifically for his record of perfect punctuality and defensive driving statistics. The drive to the office would take exactly 23 minutes in current traffic conditions. "The usual route, Mr. Sterling?" Thomas asked, already knowing the answer. "No," Marcus replied, surprising both Thomas and himself. "Take Madison Avenue today." He had noticed a subtle pattern in traffic data, suggesting a 2-minute advantage using this alternate route. Every second counted on days like this. The car pulled away from the curb, merging smoothly into the early morning traffic. Marcus opened his tablet, reviewing the latest market data. The numbers danced across the screen, telling a story of chaos that he would soon bring to order. He was so absorbed in his analysis that he barely noticed the increasing speed of passing cars. It happened in a fraction of a second, a moment that would shatter his carefully constructed world of certainties. A delivery truck ran a red light, its driver distracted by something Marcus would never know. Thomas swerved to avoid it, his training kicking in automatically. But physics, the most predictable of sciences, had other plans. The world spun in, a kaleidoscope of motion. Marcus felt weightless, then heavy, then nothing at all. His last conscious thought was of the irony. He had calculated the probability of a car accident down to 6 decimal places, and yet here he was, caught in the one variable he couldn't control. When consciousness returned, it came in fragments. The antiseptic smell of a hospital room, the steady beep of monitoring equipment, voices speaking in hushed professional tones about spinal cord damage and probable outcomes. Marcus tried to move his legs, but they remained stubbornly still, as if they belonged to someone else. Dr. Sarah Chen, the head of neurology, stood at the foot of his bed, her expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Sterling, I need to be direct with you. The impact caused severe trauma to your thoracic spine. The damage," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "is permanent. You'll need to prepare yourself for significant life changes." Marcus listened with the same analytical detachment he applied to market reports. His mind immediately began calculating rehabilitation possibilities, experimental treatments, statistical probabilities of recovery. But Dr. Chen's next words cut through his mental equations. "This isn't something you can solve with logic or willpower, Mr. Sterling. Sometimes acceptance is the only path forward." The word acceptance hit him like a physical blow. Throughout his life, he had never accepted limitations. Every obstacle was simply a problem waiting for the right solution. But now, lying in that sterile hospital room, he faced an equation with no solution, a variable that couldn't be controlled. The days that followed were a blur of specialists, tests, and increasingly desperate searches for alternatives. Marcus deployed his considerable resources, consulting the world's top physicians, exploring experimental treatments. Each conversation ended the same way, with that word he had come to hate: acceptance. His board of directors sent flowers and carefully worded messages about taking all the time he needed. The financial press buzzed with speculation about the future of his empire, but Marcus barely noticed. For the first time in his life, he was facing a problem that couldn't be solved with algorithms or market analysis. In the quiet hours of the night, when the hospital corridors fell silent, Marcus would lie awake, staring at the ceiling. His mind, once filled with complex calculations and market predictions, now churned with questions he had never allowed himself to consider. What was the value of control when the most basic aspects of life could be taken away in an instant? What good were his billions if they couldn't buy back what he had lost? The answer, he knew, lay somewhere beyond the realm of logic and numbers. But for a man who had built his entire identity on control and predictability, that was the most terrifying thought of all. Marcus Sterling's mansion, once a symbol of his success, had become his prison. The pristine white walls and minimalist decor that had once represented perfect order now felt like a sterile cage. He had been home for 3 weeks, and each day seemed longer than the last. The medical equipment installed in his bedroom disrupted the clean lines he had so carefully curated. Monitors, specialized beds, and mobility aids, each piece a constant reminder of his new reality. He had dismissed most of the nursing staff within the first week, unable to tolerate their pitying glances and gentle encouragements. "Mr. Sterling," his remaining nurse, Grace, knocked softly on his door. "It's time for your physical therapy." "Cancel it," he commanded, his voice carrying the same authority it had in board meetings. "And clear my schedule for the rest of the day." Grace hesitated, her experienced eyes taking in his rigid posture, the untouched breakfast tray, the laptop open to stock market figures. "The doctors stressed the importance of maintaining your therapy schedule." I said cancel it. The words came out sharp enough to cut glass. "And bring me the latest reports from the office." Once she left, Marcus turned his attention back to his laptop. The numbers on the screen should have been comforting. His company was still performing well under the temporary leadership he had established. But for the first time in his life, the equations and projections felt hollow. He had tried to approach his condition like any other problem, created spreadsheets tracking every minute improvement in mobility, researched every experimental treatment available, calculated the statistical probability of various outcomes. But the numbers kept leading him to the same conclusion, one he refused to accept. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from board members, business associates, and the occasional family member he had never bothered to stay in touch with. He ignored them all. The only calls he took were from his research team, tasked with finding any breakthrough treatment, no matter how experimental or costly. As evening approached, Marcus instructed his home automation system to lower the blinds. The sight of people walking freely on the street below had become unbearable. In the dimming light, he pulled up the latest medical journal articles on his tablet, scanning for any mention of spinal cord regeneration. A soft knock interrupted his reading. "Mr. Sterling?" It was Grace again. "You haven't eaten anything today." "Leave it by the door," he replied, not looking up from his tablet. "There's also a letter from the board. They're requesting a video conference to discuss the company's direction." Marcus's jaw tightened. They were getting impatient, wondering if their analytical genius would ever return to his former glory. He had built his reputation on being invincible, untouchable. Now he couldn't even stand on his own 2 feet. "Tell them I'll respond when I'm ready." His tone left no room for discussion. After Grace's footsteps faded away, Marcus wheeled himself to the window and raised the blinds slightly. The city lights twinkled below, a constellation of life continuing without him. He had once viewed these lights as a reflection of his influence, each glowing window a potential opportunity. Now they seemed to mock him, reminding him of all he had lost. His reflection in the window caught his attention. The impeccably groomed CEO had been replaced by someone he hardly recognized. His usual precise haircut had grown out, and his signature clean-shaven look was hidden behind several days' worth of stubble. The perfect image he had maintained for decades was slipping, just like everything else in his life. That night, sleep eluded him as usual. His mind, once occupied with market trends and investment strategies, now raced with unwanted thoughts. He remembered his father's words from long ago. "Control, she's an illusion, son. The sooner you accept that, the happier you'll be." He had spent his entire life proving that statement wrong, only to have it come back and haunt him now. In the early hours of the morning, Marcus found himself reviewing old emails on his phone, messages from people he had dismissed, relationships he had deemed inefficient, emotions he had calculated away. One message caught his eye, from James Morrison, the board member who had warned him about the human factor. "Numbers can't quantify the human spirit, Marcus. Remember that." He deleted the email with an angry swipe, but the words lingered in his mind. His entire life had been built on the premise that everything could be quantified, controlled, predicted. Now that foundation was crumbling, and he had no idea what would remain when it finally fell apart. As dawn approached, Marcus made a decision. He would venture outside for the first time since returning home. Not for any sentimental reason, he told himself, but because it was logical to observe the world he would need to navigate in his new condition. It was a simple data-gathering exercise, nothing more. "Grace," he called through the intercom soon as the clock hit 6 a.m., "prepare the wheelchair, we're going out this morning." The surprise in her voice was evident, but she knew better than to question him. "Yes, Mr. Sterling, I'll make the arrangements." What Marcus didn't know, couldn't calculate, was that this simple decision would set in motion events that would challenge everything he believed about control, logic, and the nature of reality itself. The morning air felt foreign on Marcus's face as Grace wheeled him through the quiet streets of his upscale neighborhood. He had chosen 6:30 a.m. deliberately, the optimal time to avoid crowds while maintaining acceptable temperature conditions. Everything was still a calculation, even in his reduced state. "The park is lovely this time of day," Grace remarked, steering them toward Central Park. Marcus didn't respond. He was too busy analyzing his surroundings, noting how different everything looked from this new perspective. The smooth sidewalks he had never noticed before now seemed full of threatening bumps and cracks. They reached a small plaza within the park, where Grace parked his wheelchair near a chess table. Marcus had specifically requested this spot. It offered maximum visibility while maintaining adequate distance from the main pathways. Even in his vulnerability, he sought control. "I'll get us some coffee," Grace said, gesturing to a nearby cart. "The usual, black, no sugar." Marcus nodded, his attention already drawn to the morning traders hurrying past, their faces buried in their phones. He could read the market's mood in their expressions, a skill he had perfected over years. Today's indicators suggested a downward trend in tech stocks. As he sat analyzing the passing crowd, something unexpected caught his attention. A boy, no more than 12 or 13, was watching him intently from a nearby bench. The child's appearance was jarring in this wealthy neighborhood. Worn clothes, unkempt hair, but with an intensity in his eyes that seemed out of place with his youth. Marcus tried to ignore him, focusing instead on the financial news playing on his phone, but he could feel the boy's gaze, persistent and unwavering. It was an anomaly. In his carefully controlled morning, an irregularity that demanded attention. Finally, Marcus looked up, preparing to summon Grace to handle the situation. But before he could act, the boy stood and walked directly toward him with surprising confidence. "You're him, aren't you?" the boy asked, his voice carrying a maturity that belied his years. "The man who controls everything." Marcus felt an unexpected jolt at the child's words. "I used to be," he replied, surprising himself with his honesty. The boy tilted his head, studying Marcus with unnerving focus. "My mom used to say that control is just an agreement we make with ourselves. When we break that agreement, that's when real change happens." Something about the boy's words, or perhaps the way he said them, made Marcus pause. "Your mother sounds like an interesting woman. Where is she now?" "Gone," the boy replied simply, without the expected emotion. "Like your ability to walk. but that doesn't mean either is lost forever. Marcus felt a surge of anger. Who was this child to speak so boldly about his condition? But before he could dismiss him, the boy continued. "I know someone who can help you walk again," he said, with such certainty that it cut through Marcus's skepticism. "Not with surgery or medicine or any of the things your money can buy. With something else, something your numbers can't explain." Under normal circumstances, Marcus would have dismissed such claims immediately. His rational mind was already cataloguing all the reasons this was impossible: medical facts, scientific evidence, statistical probabilities. But something in the boy's unwavering gaze made him hesitate. "I've consulted the best specialists in the world," Marcus said, his voice carrying a hint of the weariness he usually kept hidden. "There's nothing that can be done." The boy smiled, a knowing expression that seemed ancient on his young face. "That's because you're looking in places where everything can be explained. Sometimes the answers are in the spaces between explanations." Grace was returning with the coffee, her pace quickening as she noticed the unexpected visitor. But before she could intervene, the boy reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn piece of paper. "Come to this address tomorrow at sunrise," he said, placing the paper on Marcus's lap. "Only if you're ready to believe in something bigger than your calculations." Without waiting for a response, the boy turned and walked away, disappearing into the morning crowd with surprising speed. Grace arrived, looking concerned. "Is everything all right, Mr. Sterling? Who was that?" Marcus looked down at the paper in his lap. The address was written in careful, precise handwriting, a stark contrast to the boy's disheveled appearance. Everything about this encounter defied logical explanation, yet he couldn't dismiss it as easily as he dismissed other irregularities in his life. "Take me home, Grace," he said, carefully folding the paper and placing it in his pocket. "I need to think." As they made their way back through the park, Marcus found his mind doing something unusual. Instead of calculating probabilities and analyzing risks, it kept returning to the boy's words about the spaces between explanations. For the first time since his accident, he was confronting something his analytical mind couldn't process. That night, lying in his bed, Marcus held the piece of paper up to the light, studying it as if it might reveal its secrets through pure observation. The logical part of his brain produced countless reasons to ignore it. It was probably a scam, a desperate attempt to exploit his vulnerability, or at best, the misguided beliefs of a troubled child. Yet, something deeper, something he had spent a lifetime suppressing, whispered that perhaps there were indeed things that existed beyond the realm of his beloved numbers and calculations. As he drifted off to sleep, Marcus realized he had already made his decision, though he wasn't ready to admit it even to himself. The next morning arrived with an unusual tension in Marcus Sterling's perfectly ordered world. He had spent hours analyzing the previous day's encounter, trying to rationalize it, to fit it into his framework of logic and probability. But the boy's words kept echoing in his mind, defying his attempts at analytical dissection. "Mr. Sterling." Grace's voice came through the intercom at precisely 5:45 a.m. "Are you sure about this? We don't know anything about these people or this place." Marcus adjusted his collar, ensuring his appearance was impeccable despite his seated position. "Have Johnson bring the car around, and Grace, I won't be needing your assistance today." "But sir," "That will be all, Grace." His tone carried the same authority it had when he commanded boardrooms, though something felt different today. A slight tremor of uncertainty, perhaps, that he refused to acknowledge. Johnson, his security chief, was waiting by the car, his expression professionally neutral but clearly concerned. "We've done preliminary surveillance of the address, sir. It's in a less desirable area of the city. I strongly recommend against this." Marcus wheeled himself toward the car, his movements precise and controlled. "Your concern is noted, Johnson, but I've calculated the risks." It was a lie. For the first time in decades, he was acting without a complete risk assessment, and that fact both terrified and exhilarated him. The drive took them through increasingly unfamiliar parts of the city. Marcus watched through tinted windows as manicured lawns gave way to cramped buildings. as luxury boutiques were replaced by small family stores with signs in multiple languages. His analytical mind automatically began calculating property values and investment potential. But something else caught his attention: the vibrancy, the life that seemed to pulse through these streets despite their apparent disorder. They arrived at their destination just as the sun was beginning to paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The address led them to a narrow street between two aging apartment buildings. A small gathering of people was already there, sitting on wooden chairs or standing in small groups, talking quietly among themselves. "This is absurd," Johnson muttered, surveying the scene with professional suspicion. "Mr. Sterling, as head of your security, I cannot recommend—" "Wait here, Marcus," interrupted, his voice firm. "I'll handle this myself." As Johnson helped him into his wheelchair, Marcus noticed the dramatic contrast between his tailored suit and the modest surroundings. He had dressed formally out of habit, but now he felt conspicuous, out of place in this world that operated under different rules than his own. The boy from the park was waiting at the entrance to a small courtyard, as if he had known exactly when Marcus would arrive. His smile carried the same unsettling wisdom that had caught Marcus off guard the day before. "You came," the boy said simply. "That's the first step, showing up when your logic tells you to run." Marcus felt a familiar surge of irritation at the child's presumption, but something stopped him from delivering the cutting response that came naturally to his lips. Instead, he found himself asking, "What's your name?" "Miguel," the boy replied, then added with a hint of amusement, "But I guess you need more than that. You probably want my full name, background check, risk assessment." "That would be the prudent approach," Marcus agreed, surprised to find himself almost smiling. "Sometimes prudence is just another word for fear," Miguel said, turning to lead the way into the courtyard. "Come on, he's waiting." The courtyard opened into a small garden that defied Marcus's expectations. Instead of the rundown space he had anticipated, he found himself in a meticulously maintained haven of green life. Plants of all varieties grew in an apparent chaos that, upon closer inspection, revealed its own kind of order, different from the rigid patterns he preferred, but undeniably purposeful. People sat on benches and chairs, scattered throughout the garden, some in wheelchairs like himself, others with various visible ailments. What struck Marcus most was their expressions, a peculiar mix of hope and serenity that his analytical mind struggled to categorize. "Everyone here has a story," Miguel explained, as he guided Marcus through the garden. "Some were told they'd never walk, speak, or live normally again. Others carried wounds that no one could see, but that hurt just as much. They all came here looking for answers their doctors couldn't provide." Marcus's skepticism fought with his curiosity. "And they found these answers?" "Some did, some didn't," Miguel shrugged. "It depends on whether they're ready to accept that. Not everything in life fits into neat little boxes of probability and statistics." Before Marcus could respond, a hush fell over the garden. He turned to see a man emerging from a small building at the far end, the one they called the Healer. Marcus had expected someone imposing, perhaps dressed in exotic robes or affecting some kind of mystical appearance. Instead, he saw a modest-looking man in simple clothes with gentle eyes and hands that bore the calluses of manual work. As their eyes met across the garden, Marcus felt something he couldn't explain, a sensation that all his years of data analysis and market predictions hadn't prepared him for. It was as if those eyes could see through every carefully constructed wall he had built around himself, every mathematical formula he had used to define his existence. The Healer smiled, and in that smile, Marcus Sterling, the man who had built an empire on the certainty of numbers, felt his perfectly ordered world begin to shift on its axis. The Healer's room was unlike anything Marcus had expected. No crystals, no mystical symbols, no New Age paraphernalia. Instead, it was a simple space with white walls, wooden floors, and large windows that let in the morning light. A plain massage table occupied the center, and a few chairs were scattered around the periphery. "Welcome, Mr. Sterling," the Healer said, his voice carrying a quiet authority different from the kind Marcus wielded in his corporate world. "I see you've met Miguel." "Yes," Marcus replied, trying to maintain his usual analytical distance. "Though I'm still not clear on what exactly I'm doing here." The healer smiled, the expression crinkling the corners of his eyes. "You're here because somewhere beneath all those numbers and probabilities you live by, something inside you recognized a truth your conscious mind isn't ready to accept." Marcus felt his defenses rise. "I'm here because traditional medicine has failed to provide a solution to my condition, nothing more." "Are you sure about that?" The healer gestured toward Marcus's perfectly pressed suit, his meticulously groomed appearance. "You've dressed as if for a business meeting. Your security team is waiting outside. You've approached this like every other transaction in your life. But healing isn't a transaction, Mr. Sterling. It's a transformation." The words hit uncomfortably. Close to home, Marcus had indeed treated this visit like a business deal, down to the premium he was prepared to offer for services rendered. "Then what exactly are you offering?" "I don't offer anything," the healer replied, moving to open one of the windows. A warm breeze entered the room, carrying the scent of the garden. "I simply help people remember what they've forgotten. That the body knows how to heal itself when we stop getting in its way with our doubts and fears." Under normal circumstances, Marcus would have dismissed such talk as nonsense. But something about the healer's presence made it harder to maintain. His usual skepticism, "That's not scientifically possible," he said, though his voice lacked its usual certainty. "Science is a wonderful tool, Mr. Sterling, but it's not the only tool." The healer approached Marcus's wheelchair. "May I?" Marcus nodded, though he wasn't sure what he was agreeing to. The healer placed one hand lightly on Marcus's shoulder, and immediately something unexpected happened. A warmth spread from the point of contact, different from normal body heat, more like the feeling of sunlight on skin after a long winter. "Your body is speaking," the healer said quietly. "It's been speaking since the accident, but you've been too busy with your calculations to listen." Marcus wanted to argue, to point out the absurdity of such a statement, but he couldn't ignore the sensation flowing through him. It wasn't just physical. Memories began to surface, moments he had buried beneath years of spreadsheets and market analyses. He remembered his first major business success, not the numbers, but the pure joy of achievement. He recalled his mother's touch when he was sick as a child, how her presence had seemed to ease the pain. Images flashed through his mind. His father's disappointed face when he chose business school over medical school, the last time he had, actually laughed without calculating the social benefit of doing so. "Stop," Marcus said abruptly, pulling away from the healer's touch. The memories were too much, too raw. They threatened the carefully constructed framework of his life. The healer stepped back, watching Marcus with understanding eyes. "That's enough for today. Healing isn't just about the body, Mr. Sterling. Sometimes we need to heal old wounds before we can address new ones." "This is ridiculous," Marcus muttered, though the warmth still lingered in his shoulder. "I came here for physical healing, not whatever this is." "Did you?" The healer's question was gentle but pointed. "Or did you come here because for the first time in your life you've encountered something your numbers can't explain?" Before Marcus could respond, Miguel appeared at the door. The boy's timing seemed too perfect to be coincidental, as if he were somehow connected to the rhythm of these sessions. "Same time tomorrow?" Miguel asked, his young face wearing that disconcertingly knowing expression. Marcus opened his mouth to refuse, to end this departure from rationality. But the warmth in his shoulder pulsed once, like a reminder of something he had long forgotten. "Yes," he heard himself say. "Same time tomorrow." As Miguel wheeled him back through the garden, Marcus noticed everything with new intensity. The way sunlight filtered through the leaves, the subtle patterns in the seemingly random arrangement of plants, the peaceful expressions on the faces of others waiting for their sessions. His analytical mind tried to categorize and explain these observations, but something else was awakening within him, something that spoke in a language beyond numbers and probabilities. Johnson was waiting anxiously by the car, clearly relieved to see his employer unharmed, but when he reached to help Marcus into the car, he paused, noticing something different in his employer's bearing. "Are you all right, sir?" Johnson asked, genuine concern in his voice. Marcus looked back at the garden, at Miguel standing in the entrance, at the window where he could see the healer's silhouette. "I'm not sure," he answered honestly, perhaps for the first time in years. "But I think I might be about to find out." That night, back in his mansion, Marcus couldn't sleep. The perfectly regulated temperature of his bedroom felt stifling, and the silence he had once found comforting now seemed to echo with unspoken questions. He kept touching his shoulder where the healer's hand had rested, trying to rationalize the warmth he had felt. His laptop glowed in the darkness as he researched everything he could find about psychosomatic responses, the placebo effect, and neural pathway stimulation. There had to be a scientific explanation for what he had experienced. His fingers flew across the keyboard, creating spreadsheets to analyze variables he had never considered before: emotional states, memory triggers, subjective sensations. "Sir?" Grace's voice came through the intercom at 3 a.m. "I heard movement. Do you need anything?" Marcus hesitated, another unprecedented occurrence in his meticulously regulated life. "Grace, have you ever experienced something you couldn't explain?" The silence that followed was heavy with surprise at his unusual question. "Yes, Mr. Sterling. Many times. That's what makes life interesting, don't you think?" He didn't answer, but her words lingered in his mind as he wheeled himself to the window. The city sprawled before him, its nighttime patterns usually so predictable, so measurable. But tonight he saw something different in the scattered lights, a rhythm that defied his usual analytics, a pulse that reminded him of the strange energy in the healer's garden. His phone buzzed with an email from the board. They were concerned about his extended absence, about rumors starting to circulate in the financial press. The old Marcus would have immediately drafted a detailed response, complete with recovery timelines and probability matrices. Instead, he found himself staring at the screen, wondering when numbers had become his only language. Morning came, and with it, a surprise visitor. James Morrison, the board member who had warned him about the human factor, arrived unannounced during breakfast. "You look different, Marcus," James said, studying him with keen eyes. "Something's changed." "Nothing's changed," Marcus replied sharply, but even he could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "I'm simply exploring alternative therapeutic options." James smiled, the expression knowing and gentle. "I heard about your visit to the garden. News travels fast, even in circles where everything is supposed to be confidential." Marcus felt a flash of his old anger, the need to control every variable. "Have I been followed?" "No, old friend. But there are things that can't be hidden, changes that show themselves despite our best efforts to conceal them." James settled into a chair, his manner relaxed but purposeful. "Do you remember when we first met? You were already brilliant with numbers, but there was something else then, a spark that wasn't just about calculations." "We're not here to discuss the past," Marcus said, trying to steer the conversation back to familiar territory. "If the board has concerns—" "The board is fine," James interrupted. "I'm here because 30 years ago I watched a young man build walls around his heart using numbers as bricks. Maybe it's time for those walls to come down." Marcus wheeled himself to his desk, a movement meant to create distance, to reassert control. But as he reached for his tablet to display the latest company figures, something stopped him. The memory of the warmth in his shoulder pulsed again, and with it came a fragment of yesterday's session. The remembered sound of his mother's voice, singing him to sleep during a childhood illness. "I have another session today," he found himself saying, the words emerging before he could analyze their impact. James stood, straightening his jacket with deliberate care. "Good. And Marcus?" "Sometimes the biggest risk is never taking one at all." After James left, Marcus spent hours reviewing market reports, but the numbers on his screen kept blurring into different patterns. In one graph tracking stock performance, he suddenly saw the curve of his mother's smile. In another showing market volatility, he recognized the erratic rhythm of his own heartbeat when the healer had touched his shoulder. Grace appeared at noon with his medication and a light lunch. She moved efficiently around the room, but Marcus noticed something he had never paid attention to before. The gentle way she adjusted his pillows, the small acts of kindness he had always categorized as mere professional duty. "Grace," he said, surprising both of them. "Why do you do this work?" She paused, clearly taken aback by this unprecedented personal question from her usually distant employer. "Because sometimes people need more than just physical care, Mr. Sterling. They need to know they're not alone." The simple honesty of her answer struck him with unexpected force. All his life, he had classified relationships as transactions, emotional connections as inefficient variables. But sitting there, watching Grace arrange his lunch with unconscious grace, he felt something shift in his understanding. As the afternoon approached, bringing his second session with the healer closer, Marcus found himself doing something he had never done before. He changed from his usual business suit into a simple shirt and slacks. The decision wasn't based on any logical analysis of appropriate attire. It simply felt right, and the sensation of making a choice based on feeling rather than calculation was both disturbing and strangely liberating. Looking in the mirror, he barely recognized himself. Not because of the casual clothes, but because of something in his eyes. A questioning that had replaced his usual certainty. The man who had built an empire on absolute control was beginning to wonder if there were equations too complex for numbers to solve. The garden looked different in the afternoon light. Marcus noticed details he had missed in his analytical assessment of the previous day. The way certain plants seemed to lean toward each other. The subtle harmony in what he had initially dismissed as random arrangement. Miguel was waiting at the entrance again, but this time he wasn't alone. A young woman sat in a wheelchair beside him, her presence somehow both fragile and strong. She smiled at Marcus with a warmth that made him uncomfortable in its sincerity. "This is Sophia," Miguel said. "She's been coming here for 3 months." Marcus nodded politely, already calculating how to avoid unnecessary social interaction. But Sophia wheeled herself closer, her eyes bright with understanding. "You're still trying to solve this like a business problem, aren't you?" she asked, her voice carrying a hint of amusement. "I did the same thing at first. Brought spreadsheets, tracking every sensation, every minute change, even hired a team of researchers to explain what was happening." Despite himself, Marcus was intrigued. And what did they find? Nothing they could quantify. Sophia's smile widened. "That's when I started actually healing." Before Marcus could respond, the healer appeared in the garden. Today he wore simple, linen clothes and carried a small wooden box. He moved through the space with unhurried purpose, stopping to touch a plant here, greet a patient there. Marcus found himself tracking these movements, not to analyze them as he would have yesterday, but simply to observe. "Your energy is different today," the healer said when he reached them. "Less resistant. That's good." Marcus wanted to dispute this unscientific assessment, but he couldn't deny that something felt different. The garden sounds, birds, rustling leaves, quiet conversations, seemed to form a pattern he could almost grasp, like a language just beyond his understanding. Inside the treatment room, the healer opened the wooden box, releasing the subtle scent of herbs. "Today we work with what your body remembers," he said, mixing something in a small bowl. "Before the numbers, before the control, before the walls." "My body remembers nothing," Marcus stated firmly. "The spinal cord damage is—" "I'm not talking about the damage," the healer interrupted gently. "I'm talking about the joy your body remembered when you used to run just for the pleasure of feeling the wind. The freedom in your movements before. You learned to calculate every step." The words triggered something, a memory so old Marcus had forgotten it existed. Running through sprinklers on a hot summer day, his mother's laughter mixing with his own, the pure physical delight of movement. Without purpose or plan. The healer's hands moved to Marcus's shoulders, and this time the warmth came faster, stronger. It spread down his spine, not just as sensation but as memory. Every movement his body had ever known, every gesture unconstrained by calculation. "There," the healer said softly. "Your body hasn't forgotten. It's been waiting for you to remember." And Then it happened. A sensation so slight Marcus almost missed it. A twitch in his toe, barely perceptible but undeniably real. His analytical mind rushed to explain it away. Random nerve firing, muscle spasm, statistical anomaly. But another part of him, a part that was growing stronger with each visit to the garden, recognized it for what it was. Possibility. The session continued in silence, but it wasn't the sterile silence of his mansion or the tense silence of his boardroom. This silence felt alive, filled with something his spreadsheets couldn't capture. When it ended, Marcus found himself reluctant to leave. In the garden, Sophia was still there, talking quietly with Miguel. She looked up as Marcus emerged, noting something in his expression that made her smile. "You felt something, didn't you?" she asked. "Something your research team would say is impossible." Marcus hesitated, decades of practiced control warring with this new, unnamed feeling. "Perhaps," he finally admitted, "but correlation doesn't imply causation." Sophia laughed. The sound as unexpected and musical as wind chimes. "Try putting that on a spreadsheet, Mr. Sterling. Some things can only be measured by how they change us." As Johnson helped him into the car, Marcus realized his hands were trembling slightly, not from weakness or fear, but from something else. Anticipation, perhaps, or the first stirrings of what might be hope. "Same time tomorrow, Mr. Sterling?" Miguel asked, his young face serious. Marcus looked at the garden, at Sophia's knowing smile, at the healer standing quietly in the doorway. In his pocket, his phone buzzed with what was probably another urgent message from the board. For the first time in his adult life, he let it ring, unanswered. "Yes," he said, "same time tomorrow." The drive home was silent, but it wasn't the silence of emptiness. It was filled with the echo of Sophia's laughter, the memory of that tiny movement in his toe, and the growing awareness that some equations couldn't be solved with numbers alone. The board meeting couldn't be postponed any longer. Marcus sat in his home office, facing the wall of screens where 12 concerned faces waited for explanations. He had prepared detailed reports, financial projections, and contingency plans, his usual armor of numbers and data. But for the first time, these felt hollow, like they were missing something essential. "Marcus, we need to discuss the direction of the company," Richard Hayes, the CFO, began without preamble. "The market is getting nervous. Rumors about your condition are affecting our stock price." Marcus pulled up a chart showing the company's performance. "Our fundamentals remain strong. The automated trading systems I designed are—" "This isn't about the systems," interrupted Sarah Chen, head of operations. "It's about leadership, about visibility. The Marcus Sterling we know wouldn't hide away pursuing alternative treatments." The word alternative carried a weight of skepticism that would have angered him a week ago. Now, he found himself thinking of Sophia's laugh, of Miguel's knowing eyes, of the impossible twitch in his toe that no medical science could explain. "I understand your concerns," Marcus said, surprising himself with his calm tone. "But sometimes we need to look beyond our usual metrics." A shocked silence followed his words. James Morrison, watching carefully, leaned forward. "Marcus, are you feeling all right?" "I'm feeling—" Marcus paused, searching for words that couldn't be graphed or quantified. "I'm feeling different." The board members exchanged worried glances. This wasn't the Marcus Sterling they knew, the man who could reduce any situation to probabilities and percentages. Some began typing furiously on their tablets, probably messaging each other about his strange behavior. "We need to consider appointing an interim CEO," Richard said finally, "just until you're back to yourself." The old Marcus would have fought this suggestion with every weapon in his analytical arsenal. But sitting there, feeling the lingering warmth from his morning session with the healer, he found himself considering it with unexpected clarity. "Perhaps you're right," he said quietly. The stunned silence that followed was broken by a commotion outside his office. Grace's voice carried through the door, unusually urgent. "Mr. Sterling, you need to see this." "Meeting adjourned," Marcus said, disconnecting before anyone could protest. "Come in, Grace." She rushed in, holding his tablet. "Sir, look at this." She pulled up a video from one of the security cameras in his private gym. It showed his legs during his morning physical therapy session, and there, unmistakably, was a deliberate movement. Small, but undeniable. Marcus stared at the screen, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. The rational part of him wanted to analyze it, to break it down into measurable components. But another part, the part that was growing stronger, with each visit to the garden, simply felt the truth of it. "When did this happen?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "This morning, during your exercises. I didn't want to say anything until I was sure." Grace's eyes were bright with emotion. "It's not just random spasms, Mr. Sterling. You're moving your legs." Marcus wheeled himself to the window, looking out at the city he had once thought he understood completely. The afternoon sun caught the glass of distant buildings, creating patterns of light and shadow that seemed to dance. Like the garden, he thought, like life itself. His phone buzzed continuously with messages from board members, but he let them go unanswered. Instead, he found himself reaching for a different number, one he hadn't called in years. "Mom?" His voice caught. "Slightly. I know it's been a while, but I need to tell you something." The conversation that followed was unlike any he'd had in decades. He told her about the accident, about his isolation, about the garden and the healer. He told her about the boy who seemed to see through all his carefully constructed walls, and about the woman in the wheelchair whose laughter carried more wisdom than all his financial models. "Oh, Marcus," his mother said softly, "you're finally coming back to us." "I don't know what's happening to me," he admitted. "Everything I believed in, everything I built my life on, it's all shifting." "No, sweetheart," she corrected gently. "It's not shifting, it's expanding. You're finally letting life be bigger than your spreadsheets." After the call, Marcus sat in silence, watching the day fade into evening. Grace came in with his evening medication, but instead of their usual efficient routine, he asked her to stay for a moment. "Tell me about your family," he said. "In all these years, I've never asked." The surprise on her face softened into a smile as she began to share stories about her children, her struggles as a single mother, her dreams for their future. Marcus listened, really listened, and found himself wondering how many other stories he had missed in his pursuit of perfect control. As night fell, he made a decision. Reaching for his phone, he typed a brief message to the board. "Taking a leave of absence. James Morrison will serve as interim CEO. Details to follow." Then he called Johnson. "Tomorrow morning, we're going to the garden earlier than usual. There's something I need to do first." Dawn found Marcus at his company's headquarters, wheeling through the familiar corridors that had once been his domain. The early morning cleaning staff looked startled to see him, but he barely noticed their reactions. His attention was focused on a different kind of calculation now, one that couldn't be expressed in numbers. In his office, he began a task that would have seemed impossible a week ago. He went through his personal files, not analyzing performance metrics or market trends, but looking for something else entirely, traces of the human stories he had overlooked in his pursuit of perfect efficiency. He found them in unexpected places. A janitor he had almost fired for decreased productivity, until Grace quietly mentioned his wife's illness. A junior analyst whose innovative proposal he had dismissed because it didn't fit his probability models. Countless moments where he had chosen data over humanity. As he worked, he felt it again, that subtle movement in his legs, stronger now, like a whisper becoming a voice. But instead of immediately documenting it in his recovery spreadsheet, he simply allowed himself to feel it, to experience the moment without analysis. The sun was fully up when he finally reached the garden. Miguel was waiting, but today he wasn't alone. Sophia was there, along with several others Marcus had seen during his visits, each with their own story of healing that defied conventional explanation. "You've been busy," Miguel said, noting the stack of folders in Marcus's lap. "Yes," Marcus replied. "I'm learning to solve different kinds of equations." The healer emerged from his room, watching with quiet understanding as Marcus distributed the folders. Each contained something specific: job offers, educational opportunities, investment in small businesses, support for medical treatments. Not calculated for maximum return on investment, but chosen for the potential to change lives. "I used to think healing was about fixing what's broken," Marcus said, watching as people opened their folders with trembling hands. "But it's really about remembering what was whole all along, isn't it?" The healer smiled. "You're learning a new language, Mr. Sterling, one that speaks in heartbeats rather than numbers." The morning session was different from the others. As the healer worked, Marcus felt not just the physical sensations, but a deeper movement, like walls crumbling, not in chaos, but in a kind of choreographed surrender. He thought of his mother's words about life being bigger than spreadsheets, and for the first time he truly understood. Sophia wheeled herself closer as the session ended. "Something's different about you today," she observed. "You're not fighting it anymore." Marcus nodded, feeling the truth of her words in every cell of his body. "I spent my life trying to control uncertainty, but maybe uncertainty is where the miracles happen." As if in response to his words, he felt it, the strongest movement yet. Not just a twitch this time, but a deliberate shift. Sophia saw it, too, her eyes widening as she watched his foot move. "That's not supposed to be possible," she whispered. "According to whom?" Miguel asked, his young face alight with that ancient wisdom. "The same doctors who said you'd never regain sensation? The same experts who said Mr. Sterling's condition was permanent?" Marcus looked at his legs, at the visible proof of something. His old self would have dismissed as statistically impossible. But he was learning that some things couldn't be contained in statistics, like the joy in Sophia's laugh, the wisdom in Miguel's eyes, the healing in the healer's touch. The garden was filling up with its usual morning visitors, but today they moved differently, energized by the folders Marcus had brought. He watched as people shared their news. A single mother discovering she had funding for her children's education, a talented artist finding support for his gallery, a former athlete gaining access to experimental treatment. "You're not just healing yourself," the healer observed quietly. "You're learning to help others heal, too." Marcus thought about his board meeting the previous day, about his decision to step back from the company he had built. In the past, such a choice would have seemed like failure. Now, it felt like growth. "The numbers will always be part of who I am," he said, watching as his foot moved again, stronger this time. "But maybe they're not all of who I can be." As the morning light filled the garden, Marcus Sterling, the man who had once believed only in what could be measured, felt himself becoming part of something that defied measurement. It wasn't just his body that was healing. It was something deeper, something that had been waiting all his life for him to notice it. The garden hummed with life around him, each person's story adding to an equation more complex and beautiful than any he had ever calculated. And in that moment, he understood that true healing wasn't about recovering what was lost. It was about discovering what had been there all along, waiting to be remembered. News of the changes at Sterling Enterprises spread quickly through the financial world. The story of the ruthless CEO who suddenly started directing company resources toward community development and healing centers sparked intense speculation. Some called it a crisis of leadership. Others wondered if Marcus Sterling had finally lost his legendary control. But in the garden, where Marcus now spent most of his mornings, none of that mattered. Here different stories were unfolding, stories that wouldn't make the financial pages, but carried their own kind of wealth. "Watch this," Sophia said one morning, her eyes bright with excitement. She gripped the arms of her wheelchair and, with visible effort, pushed herself to a standing position. It was brief, just a few seconds, but the triumph in her face outshone any market victory Marcus had ever achieved. "How long have you been practicing that?" he asked, noticing how the other garden regulars gathered around, their faces reflecting shared joy. "Every day while you were working with the healer," she replied, settling back into her chair. "But that's not the best part." She reached into her bag and pulled out a sketch pad. "I've started drawing again, the garden, the people here, their stories. I needed a way to capture it all." Marcus studied the drawings, beautiful, flowing lines that seemed to capture not just the physical appearance of the garden, but something more, something that resonated with the new awareness growing within him, One sketch in particular caught his eye, a portrait of Miguel, somehow managing to capture both the boy's youth and his ancient wisdom. "You've captured his essence," the healer said, appearing quietly beside them. "Just as you're discovering your own." Marcus felt it then, another movement in his legs stronger than before. But now these movements no longer surprised him. They felt like part of a larger awakening, a harmony he was gradually learning to hear. "Mr. Sterling," Miguel's voice carried across the garden. He was helping a new arrival, a young woman with trembling hands and uncertain steps. "This is Anna. She's a former concert pianist." Marcus wheeled himself over, noticing the way Anna's fingers moved constantly as if playing invisible keys. Her story emerged in quiet words, a progressive nerve condition that had ended her career, the betrayal of the body she had trained since childhood. "The doctors say it's irreversible," she said, her voice carrying the same bitter skepticism Marcus had once felt. "That I should accept it and move on." "The doctors once said the same about me," Marcus replied, surprising himself with the gentleness in his voice. "But I'm learning that acceptance doesn't mean giving up. Sometimes it means opening yourself to possibilities beyond what science can explain." He found himself sharing his own journey, not just the physical healing but the deeper transformation. As he spoke, he noticed Anna's hands growing steadier, her posture softening from rigid despair to something more open. "Music lives in more than just our hands," the healer added, joining their conversation. "It lives in our hearts, our memories, our very selves. Sometimes we need to let go of how we think it should be expressed to discover new ways it wants to emerge." Later that afternoon, something extraordinary happened. Anna, who had been sitting quietly by the garden's small pond, suddenly moved to the old piano in the corner, an instrument Marcus had never seen anyone play. Her hands hovered over the keys for a long moment, trembling but determined. The first notes were hesitant, imperfect, but as she played, something shifted. The tremors in her hands didn't disappear, but they became part of the music, creating something new, something that spoke of both struggle and transcendence. Marcus watched as the garden fell silent, everyone touched by the raw honesty of the music. He saw Sophia quickly sketching, capturing the moment. Miguel sat cross-legged by the piano, his eyes closed, a smile of pure joy on his face. Looking around, Marcus realized that the garden had become more than just a place of healing. It was a crucible of transformation, where limitations became gateways to new possibilities. Each person's journey here was unique, yet somehow interconnected, creating a tapestry of healing that was both personal and collective. The movement in his legs was stronger now, more consistent, but he understood that the real miracle wasn't just in the physical recovery. It was in the way his heart had opened, how he had learned to see beyond the surface of things to the deeper currents of possibility flowing beneath. As Anna's music filled the garden, Marcus pulled out his phone and made a call. "James," he said to his interim CEO, "I need you to set up a foundation. It's time to expand the garden's reach." The sun was setting as Anna played her final notes, her hands steadier than they had been in months. In the golden light, Marcus saw tears on her cheeks, not of sorrow but of rediscovery. She had found something she thought was lost forever, just as he had. And in that moment, Marcus Sterling, who had once measured success in market shares and profit margins, understood that true wealth couldn't be calculated in numbers. It was measured in moments like these, in music reborn, in hands steadied, in hearts open to new possibilities. The foundation took shape with the same efficiency that had characterized all of Marcus's previous ventures, but with a fundamentally different purpose. Instead of maximizing profits, its mission was to create spaces of healing and possibility throughout the city, and eventually beyond. One morning, as Marcus worked with the healer on his increasingly responsive legs, Grace arrived with unexpected news. "The board is here," she said, her expression concerned. "All of them." Marcus looked around the garden, at Sophia teaching an art class to a group of children from the neighborhood, at Anna giving her first piano lesson to Miguel, at the quiet work of healing happening in every corner. "Good," he said. "It's time." They saw this for themselves. The board members entered the garden like aliens in their expensive suits and polished shoes. Their discomfort was visible as they navigated the informal space, their usual confidence shaken by an environment that couldn't be quantified in their familiar terms. "Marcus," Richard Hayes began, his CFO's instincts clearly troubled by what he saw as resource misallocation. "We need to discuss the direction of these investments." But before Marcus could respond, something unexpected happened. James Morrison, who had been quietly observing the garden, suddenly stopped. His face showed a recognition that transcended business concerns. "Sarah?" he called out, his voice trembling slightly. "Sarah Chen." A woman working with a group of elderly residents turned around. It was indeed Sarah Chen, the head of operations who had been so concerned about Marcus's leadership just weeks ago. But she wasn't here on business. She was wearing casual clothes, her usual professional mask replaced by something more genuine. "I didn't expect to see you here," she said to her fellow board members, but her eyes stayed on James. "My mother. She started coming here last week. The doctors had given up on her arthritis, but now..." She gestured to an elderly woman who was gently practicing Tai Chi with a small group. The garden had a way of revealing such connections. Marcus had learned. As the board members stood there, more stories emerged. Richard's nephew struggling with chronic pain, another member's daughter recovering from trauma, the hidden wounds and hopes that existed beneath their corporate personas. "This is what I've been trying to tell you," Marcus said, wheeling himself into their midst. "Some investments can't be measured in quarterly returns." As if to emphasize his point, he gripped the arms of his wheelchair and with careful concentration pushed himself to a standing position. It lasted only moments, but the impact was profound. The board members who had seen him build an empire through sheer force of will now watched as he demonstrated a different kind of strength. "We're not abandoning our business principles," he continued, settling back into his chair. "We're expanding them. The garden has taught me that true growth isn't just about accumulation, it's about transformation." The healer joined them, his simple presence somehow making their business attire seem like costumes. "Your colleague is learning a profound truth," he said quietly. "When we heal ourselves, we create space for others to heal too." Throughout the day, the board members wandered the garden, their initial skepticism gradually giving way to something else. They watched Sophia's art students find new ways to express their stories. They heard Anna's music students discover sounds they never thought they could make. They saw the everyday miracles that occurred when people were given space to heal and grow. "It's not just about the physical healing," Marcus explained as they gathered for a final discussion. "It's about creating environments where transformation becomes possible. Every person here is learning to rewrite their story." By day's end, the EU board's perspective had shifted. Instead of questioning the allocation of resources, they began discussing ways to expand the foundation's reach. Sarah Chen offered to connect them with medical research facilities. Richard Hayes suggested creating a sustainable funding model that could support similar gardens across the country. As the board members left, James Morrison lingered behind. "You know, Marcus," he said, watching as Miguel helped a new arrival find their way around the garden, "when I talked about the human factor all those years ago, I never imagined this is where it would lead." Marcus smiled, feeling the now familiar warmth of healing energy flowing through his body. "Neither did I, but that's the beauty of it, isn't it? Some things can't be predicted. They can only be discovered." That evening, as the garden settled into its peaceful twilight routine, Marcus sat with Sophia, Miguel, and the healer. They watched as Anna played a gentle melody on the piano, her once trembling hands now moving with growing confidence across the keys. "You're creating something remarkable here," Sophia said, adding final touches to a new sketch. "A place where people remember who they really are." "No," Marcus corrected gently. "We're all creating it together. Every story, every healing, every moment of rediscovery, they're all part of something larger than any of us." He felt the strength in his legs, the daily increasing control. But he knew now that this physical healing was just part of a greater transformation. The real miracle was in the opening of hearts, the reconnection with forgotten possibilities, the rediscovery of what it meant to be fully human. The new healing center took shape at the edge of the financial district, a bold statement bridging two worlds that Marcus once thought were incompatible. The building maintained his signature attention to detail, but now with a different purpose. Living walls brought the garden's energy inside, while large windows dissolved the boundary between interior and exterior spaces. "It's beautiful," Sophia said, wheeling herself through the main atrium where her artwork now hung, massive canvases capturing the spirit of healing she had witnessed in the original garden. But will it have the same magic? Marcus understood her concern. The original garden had grown organically, shaped by necessity and hope. This new space, with its careful design and corporate funding, risked feeling too structured, too controlled. "Watch," he said, gesturing to the entrance where the morning's first visitors were arriving. A young executive in an expensive suit held the door for a grandmother in worn clothes, their eyes meeting in a moment of simple human connection. A former athlete who had lost the use of his legs shared a bench with a high-powered lawyer, struggling with anxiety. In the waiting area, a child's laughter mixed with the quiet conversations of cancer survivors. "The magic isn't in the place," Miguel observed, appearing beside them with his usual quiet wisdom. "It's in what happens when people remember they're more than their circumstances." The healer had agreed to divide his time between the original garden and this new space, understanding the importance of maintaining connection between both communities. Today he moved through the atrium with the same unhurried presence that had first caught Marcus's attention. "Your worlds are merging," he said to Marcus, watching as a group of board members toured the facility alongside community leaders. "Just as you are becoming whole." Marcus nodded, feeling the truth of those words in his increasingly responsive body. He could now stand for several minutes at a time and take small steps with support. But more significantly, he had learned to move between his old world of numbers and this new realm of immeasurable possibilities with growing ease. Anna had become the center's music therapy coordinator, her own ongoing healing journey inspiring others to rediscover their voices. Today she sat at the grand piano in the atrium, a gift from one of the board members, playing a piece that seemed to weave together classical structure and free-flowing emotion. "Mr. Sterling," a hesitant voice interrupted his thoughts. A young analyst from his company stood before him, tablet in hand. "I've been running some numbers on the center's impact." Marcus smiled, remembering his own journey from rigid analysis to deeper understanding. "Show me," he said, wheeling himself to a quiet corner. The analyst's data told an interesting story. Employee satisfaction scores had risen dramatically since the center opened. Sick days had decreased. Productivity had improved, not through pressure or competition, but through a more balanced, human-centered approach to work. "But there's something else," the analyst said, showing him a series of graphs. "Something I can't quite quantify. The way people interact, the energy in the office, it's different." "Some things can't be captured in data," Marcus replied, thinking of his own transformation, "but that doesn't make them less real." As the day progressed, Marcus watched the space come alive with stories of healing and connection. A stressed trader found peace in Sophia's art class. A homeless veteran discovered purpose helping others with physical therapy. The boundaries between helper and helped, between professional and personal, between success and struggle began to blur. Grace, who had taken on the role of center coordinator, moved through the space with natural authority, her innate compassion now fully expressed in her work. "We've had to start a waiting list," she told Marcus. "Word is spreading faster than we anticipated." "Then we'll need to expand sooner than planned," Marcus replied, his business acumen now serving a different kind of growth. "The foundation can support 3 more centers by year's end." Later that afternoon, Marcus led a unique kind of board meeting in the center's rooftop garden. Business strategies merged with healing principles, profit projections included measures of human flourishing, and corporate goals expanded to embrace community transformation. "We're creating a new model," he explained to the assembled leaders, One that recognizes that true success includes the health of the whole system, people, communities, and yes, profits too. As he spoke, he realized how far he had come from the man who once believed only in what could be measured. The numbers were still important. They provided structure and sustainability, but now they served something larger, something that could only be felt in the heart and witnessed in transformed lives. Standing carefully, supporting himself on the podium, Marcus looked out over the city he had once sought to conquer. Now he saw it differently, not as a battlefield for financial victory, but as a web of interconnected stories, each holding the potential for healing and growth. The sun was setting, painting the sky in colors that reminded him of Sophia's artwork. In the atrium below, Anna's music rose to meet the evening light, carrying with it the hopes and healing of countless hearts. Marcus Sterling, once known as the man who controlled everything, had found something far more valuable than control. He had found purpose. The impact of the healing centers rippled through the city in ways that even Marcus's expansive new vision hadn't anticipated. What began as a bridge between the financial district and the community garden had become a movement, touching lives across all social and economic boundaries. One morning, as Marcus worked with his physical therapy, he now insisted on group sessions rather than private ones, a familiar face appeared at the door. James Morrison stood watching, his usual confident demeanor softened by emotion. "My wife started walking again yesterday," he said, when Marcus wheeled over to greet him. The doctors had said it was impossible after her stroke, but he gestured to the garden where his wife was now practicing Tai Chi with a small group. "This place, what you've created here, it's changing everything." Marcus smiled, remembering his own journey from skepticism to belief. "We didn't create it," he corrected gently. "We just created the space for it to happen." The morning unfolded with its usual rhythm of healing and discovery. Sophia led an art therapy session where corporate executives sat alongside homeless youth, their shared creativity bridging gaps that society usually kept fixed. Anna's music filled the space, now accompanied by a growing ensemble of recovering musicians who had found their way to the center. Miguel, who had become something of a youth coordinator, worked with a group of children from various backgrounds. "Everyone has a story of healing to share," he told them, his young voice carrying that ancient wisdom that had first caught Marcus's attention. "Sometimes we just need someone to remind us to listen." The healer moved through the space with his characteristic serenity, but today he seemed to be watching Marcus with particular attention. During their session, he finally spoke what was on his mind. "You're ready," he said simply. Marcus felt the truth of those words in his body, which now responded to his commands with growing strength and control. "Ready for what?" "To understand that healing isn't just about getting back what was lost," the healer replied. "It's about discovering what's possible." As if to demonstrate this truth, Marcus found himself standing, then taking several steps without support. The movement wasn't perfect. It probably never would be, but it carried a grace that came from acceptance rather than control. The news spread quickly through the center, not as a miracle, but as confirmation of what everyone there had come to believe, that healing followed its own path, one that couldn't be forced or predicted, only supported and celebrated. That afternoon, Marcus received an unexpected visit from his mother. She stood in the atrium, taking in the scene with tears in her eyes. "This is what your father always hoped for you," she said softly. "Not just success, but purpose." Marcus thought of his father, of their complicated relationship, of all the years he had spent trying to prove that control was the key to life. "I wish he could see this," he said. "He can," his mother replied, watching as a group of children ran laughing through the garden. In every life touched, in every heart opened, in every person who finds their way back to themselves, he sees it. The day brought more visitors, potential donors, skeptical medical professionals, curious community leaders. Marcus let them observe, ask questions, experience the space for themselves. He had learned that the center's power couldn't be explained in presentations or proven with data. It had to be felt, witnessed, experienced. Sophia captured it all in her artwork, The moments of breakthrough, the quiet victories, the connections formed across seemingly insurmountable divides. Her latest series, Healing Horizons, had been noticed by major galleries, but she chose to keep her work where it could continue to inspire those on their own healing journeys. Art isn't just about beauty, she explained to a group of visitors. It's about showing us possibilities we forgot existed. As evening approached, Marcus sat in the rooftop garden, watching the city transition from day to night. He could feel the strength in his legs, the new confidence in his movements, but he understood now that physical healing was just the beginning. Anna joined him, her hands now steady enough to hold 2 cups of tea. "Sometimes I think about that first day," she said. "When I was so sure nothing would ever change, how could I have known that losing one way of making music would lead to finding so many others?" Marcus nodded, understanding completely. His own journey from the man who controlled everything to someone who had learned to embrace uncertainty had opened doors he never knew existed. The healing centers were just the beginning. Already, similar spaces were taking root in other cities, other countries. "We're part of something larger than ourselves," he said, watching the lights come on across the city, something that was always there, waiting for us to notice. The evening air carried the sound of music from below, Anna's students giving their first public performance. In the garden, Sophia's art class was finishing their day's work. Miguel sat with a new arrival, offering the same quiet wisdom that had once helped Marcus find his way. And through it all moved the healer, not as the source of healing, but as a reminder of what was possible when hearts opened and spirits remembered their own power to transform. 1 year had passed since Marcus first entered the garden. The network of healing centers had grown to 12 locations across the country, each one a unique blend of the original garden spirit and its community's specific needs. Today, Marcus fully stood, in the original garden watching as Miguel guided a new group of visitors through the space. The boy had grown taller over the year, but his eyes still held that same ancient wisdom. He had become an integral part of the healing community, his natural ability to bridge worlds making him invaluable as the centers expanded. "Remember when you first came here?" Miguel asked, joining Marcus after his tour. "You were looking for a mathematical solution to a spiritual question." Marcus smiled, remembering his initial skepticism, his desperate need to quantify and control everything. "And you were the variable I couldn't calculate." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a sleek corporate car. A woman emerged, her expensive suit and rigid posture reminiscent of Marcus's former self. Her face bore the tight control of someone holding themselves together through sheer will. "That's Claire Thompson," Miguel said quietly, "CEO of Global Innovations. She read about you in Forbes." The article had caused quite a stir in the business world. The algorithm whisperer becomes the soul healer, not the kind of headline Marcus would have appreciated in his previous life. But it had opened doors, bringing people like Claire who might never otherwise have found their way to healing. "Ms. Thompson," Marcus greeted her, noting the subtle widening of her eyes as she saw him standing without support. "Welcome to the garden." "Mr. Sterling," she responded, her voice carefully modulated. "I'm here because my board suggested it would be good PR to support your foundation. Nothing more." Marcus exchanged a knowing look with Miguel. They had heard similar declarations before. "Of course," he said. "Let me show you around." As they walked through the garden, Marcus's steps measured but steady. He didn't launch into statistics about healing rates or financial projections. Instead, he let the space speak for itself. They passed Sophia teaching an art class where children from wealthy families painted alongside kids from the local shelter. Anna's music therapy session was in full swing, her once trembling hands now confidently guiding others to find their own rhythm. "I don't understand," Claire said, watching as a former executive in a wheelchair shared a laugh with a young street artist. "Where are the treatment protocols? The progress metrics?" "We track those," Marcus replied, leading her to a quiet corner of the garden. "But they're not what matters most. Tell me, Ms. Thompson, when was the last time you slept through the night?" The question caught her off guard. The carefully maintained facade cracked slightly, revealing exhaustion beneath. That's not relevant to... It's all relevant. The healer's voice came from behind them. He had appeared silently, as was his way. The sleepless nights, the tension headaches, the feeling that no matter how much control you maintain, something essential is slipping away. Claire's composure wavered. How did you... Because I was you, Marcus said gently. Different circumstances, same story. Believing that if we could just control everything, calculate every variable, we could prevent anything from ever going wrong. A child's laughter rang out across the garden, one of Miguel's young students discovering the joy of movement in a physical therapy session. Claire watched, something shifting in her expression. My daughter used to laugh like that, she said so quietly Marcus almost missed it. Before the divorce, before I buried myself in work, before you forgot that some things can't be controlled, only lived, the healer completed. Marcus saw the moment the first wall crumbled, just as his own had, 1 year ago. Claire's hands, perfectly manicured, began to tremble slightly. Her shoulders, always pulled back in perfect posture, softened. I don't know how to do this anymore, she whispered. Any of it. That's the first step, Miguel said, appearing with a cup of tea, admitting that the old ways aren't working. They sat together in the garden as the afternoon light softened. Claire slowly began to share her story, the pressure to be perfect, the fear of showing any weakness, the growing sense that success had become a cage rather than an achievement. Marcus listened, recognizing every word. But now he could offer something he wished someone had offered him sooner. The understanding that transformation wasn't about abandoning who you were, but about expanding into who you could become. Your business acumen isn't the problem, he explained. It's a gift when used in service of something larger than profit. As if to demonstrate this truth, a group of corporate volunteers arrived for their weekly session, helping with garden maintenance and spending time with community members. The boundaries between giving and receiving healing had blurred. Everyone, both a teacher and a student in the art of being fully human. Claire watched it all, her analytical mind visibly trying to make sense of what she was witnessing. But something else was awakening too, a recognition perhaps of possibilities she had forgotten existed. This isn't what I expected, she finally said. Marcus smiled, remembering his own journey from resistance to revelation. It never is. That's the beauty of it. The day of the Foundation's first international conference arrived with a sense of both culmination and beginning. Representatives from healing centers across the globe gathered in the original garden where it all began. Marcus stood at the entrance, greeting each arrival personally, his steady steps a living testimony to the journey they were all sharing. Sophia's artwork lined the pathways, not just her original pieces, but works created by patients-turned-artists from every center. Anna's music students performed throughout the day, their melodies weaving together classical precision and emotional freedom. The garden had been expanded to accommodate the gathering, but it maintained its essential character, a space where transformation was not just possible, but expected. Look, what you've started, his mother said, standing beside him. She had become a regular presence at the garden, her natural warmth adding another layer of healing to the space. Not me, Marcus corrected, watching as Miguel led a workshop on youth, mentoring, his simple wisdom now touching lives across continents. All of us together. The healer moved through the crowd, still as unassuming as ever, despite the growing recognition of his work. He stopped near Marcus, observing the gathering with quiet satisfaction. You understand now, he said, why that boy approached you that first day. Marcus looked at Miguel, remembering their first encounter. He saw something in me I couldn't see in myself. Just as you now see it in others, the healer nodded toward Claire Thompson, who had become a regular visitor and was now one of the Foundation's strongest supporters. She stood with a group of business leaders, explaining how integrating healing principles into corporate culture had transformed not just her company's performance, but its very purpose. The day unfolded like a living demonstration of everything the healing centers stood for. Medical professionals shared space with spiritual teachers, corporate executives learned from community organizers, and everywhere, stories of transformation were shared and celebrated. Grace, now the Foundation's Global Operations Director, approached with an update. "The World Health Organization wants to study our results," she said, "and 3 more countries have requested centers." Marcus nodded, but his attention was on a quiet scene unfolding nearby. A young executive in a wheelchair, recently injured in an accident, was speaking with Sophia. The look of desperate hope in his eyes was achingly familiar. "Excuse me," Marcus said, making his way over to them. As he approached, he heard Sophia sharing her own story of healing. The executive looked up as Marcus joined them, recognition flickering across his face. "You're Marcus Sterling," he said. "I studied your business strategies in school." "That was a different life," Marcus replied, sitting down beside them. "Let me tell you about a garden, a boy with wise eyes, and what happens when we let go of trying to control everything." He shared his story, not just the physical healing, but the deeper transformation. Marcus saw the same change beginning in the young man's eyes that he had experienced himself. The shift from seeing limitations to recognizing possibilities. The sun was setting when Marcus finally stood to address the gathered crowd. He looked out at the faces before him, each one carrying their own story of healing, each one now part of something larger than themselves. "A year ago," he began, "I believed that everything in life could be reduced to numbers and probabilities. I built an empire on that belief. But life had other plans, plans that no algorithm could predict, no spreadsheet could contain." He gestured to the garden around them, to the people who had become family, to the movement that had grown from one small space of healing to a global network of transformation. "What we're creating here isn't just about healing bodies, though. That happens too. It's about remembering who we really are beneath all our calculations and controls. It's about discovering that our wounds, our struggles, our supposed limitations, these are often the doorways to our greatest gifts." The garden glowed in the evening light, Sophia's artwork catching the last rays of sun, Anna's music rising to meet the moment. Miguel stood with his group of young mentors, their presence a promise that this work would continue and grow. "I once thought I had lost everything," Marcus continued, his voice carrying the weight of lived truth. "But what I really lost was the illusion of control. And in losing that, I found something far more precious, the ability to be fully human, fully alive, fully present to all that life offers." He looked out at the faces before him, Claire Thompson with tears in her eyes, James Morrison holding his wife's hand, the young executive in the wheelchair leaning forward with new hope, and so many others whose lives had been touched by this growing ripple of healing. "This is the greatest equation I've ever encountered," he concluded. "One that can't be calculated but must be lived, that when we heal ourselves we help heal others, and when we help heal others we continue our own healing. This is the miracle that needs no explanation, the truth that lives in every heart waiting to be remembered." As the applause faded into the evening air, Marcus felt the rightness of it all, not in his analytical mind, but in the deeper wisdom of his transformed heart. The garden hummed with life around him, each person a testament to the endless possibilities that emerge when we let go of control and open ourselves to the greater healing that awaits us. Salty Diaz. 2 years after his first step into the garden, Marcus stood at the podium of the Global Health Summit, his posture strong and sure. The audience before him included medical professionals, business leaders, and healing practitioners from around the world. But his attention was drawn to the familiar faces in the front row. Miguel, now a poised teenager, Sophia, whose art therapy programs had revolutionized trauma treatment, and Anna, whose music therapy methods were being studied by leading neurologists. "When I first entered the garden," Marcus began, his voice carrying the quiet authority of lived experience, "I was looking for a way to fix what was broken. What I found instead was a way to become whole." The presentation screen behind him showed images of healing centers that had sprouted across 5 continents. Each one carried the essence of the original garden while adapting to its local community's needs. Traditional medicine worked alongside alternative healing practices, corporate efficiency merged with compassionate care, and the boundaries between healer and healed continued to blur. "The numbers, for those who still think in such terms," Marcus said with a gentle smile, "are impressive. Thousands of lives touched, recovery rates that defy medical expectations, and a new model of healthcare that combines the best of all worlds." Claire Thompson, now a regular speaker at healing conferences, nodded from her seat. Her own company had become a case study in conscious business practices, proving that profit and purpose could coexist and enhance each other. "But the real story," Marcus continued, "isn't in the statistics. It's in the moments of transformation that happen every day in these spaces. It's in the executive who learns to feel again, the child who discovers their inner strength, the doctor who remembers why they first chose to heal. The healer, who rarely attended such large gatherings, stood quietly at the back of the hall. His presence reminded Marcus of that first touch that had awakened something long dormant in his soul. Now that awakening had rippled out to touch countless others. "We've created something that transcends traditional categories," Marcus explained. "These aren't just medical facilities or wellness centers. They're spaces where the artificial boundaries we've created, between business and compassion, science and spirituality, giving and receiving, dissolve into something more authentic and whole." He gestured to Grace, who had become the Foundation's executive director, overseeing the global expansion while maintaining the intimate, healing atmosphere that made each center unique. Under her leadership, the Foundation had developed training, programs that helped others create similar spaces in their own communities. "What began as one man's desperate search for healing has become a movement," Grace added, joining Marcus at the podium. "But it's a movement without leaders or followers, only partners in the journey of transformation." The audience listened, as Marcus and Grace shared stories from around the world. A war-torn community in the Middle East, where former enemies now healed together. A corporate headquarters in Tokyo, where meditation gardens had replaced stress-filled break rooms. A children's hospital in Brazil, where art and music therapy worked alongside traditional treatments. The old Marcus would have tried to quantify all of this, he admitted, drawing knowing laughter from those who remembered his former reputation. He would have demanded metrics, guarantees, controlled studies. And while we have those, impressive ones, they're not what matters most. Images of transformed lives filled the screen behind him. The young executive in the wheelchair, who now ran adaptive sports programs. The stressed CEO who had found her laugh again, the scared children who had rediscovered their joy. Each face told a story of healing that transcended physical recovery. "What matters most is that we're remembering something essential about being human," Marcus continued. "We're remembering that healing isn't just about fixing what's broken. It's about discovering what's possible when we let go of our need to control everything." The sun was setting outside the conference hall, its light filtering through the windows in a way that reminded Marcus of his first evening in the garden. So much had changed since then, yet the essential truth he had discovered remained the same, that the greatest transformations happen when we open ourselves to possibilities beyond our calculations. "The garden taught me that true healing is never just personal," he concluded. "It ripples out, touching everyone it encounters, creating new possibilities with each connection. And while I once thought my legacy would be measured in market shares and profit margins, I now know it will be measured in lives transformed, hearts opened, and hope restored." As the applause filled the hall, Marcus looked at the faces before him, each one carrying their own story of healing, each one now part of something larger than themselves. The man who had once sought to control everything had a catalyst for a kind of change that couldn't be controlled, only nurtured and celebrated. The original garden had grown, but its heart remained the same. On a quiet morning, 5 years after his first visit, Marcus walked its familiar paths, each step a testament to both physical and spiritual healing. The early sun cast long shadows through the trees, many of which he had helped plant himself. Miguel walked beside him, no longer the mysterious child but a young man growing into his wisdom. They stopped at the old piano where Anna was teaching a new student, a former surgeon whose hands had been injured, now discovering a different way to heal. "Do you ever miss your old life?" Miguel asked, watching as Sophia prepared for her morning art class. Her work now hung in galleries worldwide, but she still spent most of her time here, helping others find their voice through creativity. Marcus considered the question, remembering the man he had been, powerful, controlled, and desperately alone. "I miss the certainty sometimes," he admitted, "the illusion that everything could be calculated and controlled." "But?" Miguel prompted, smiling knowingly. "But I wouldn't trade this uncertainty, this openness to possibility, for all the control in the world." They reached the center of the garden, where the healer was working with a group of new arrivals. Among them was a young tech entrepreneur, her frustrated expression reminding Marcus of his own early days. "Some things never change," he observed quietly. "There will always be people who need to learn what we learned here." The garden had become more than a place of healing. It was a living symbol of what was possible when barriers broke down and hearts opened. Corporate executives volunteered, alongside community members. Medical students learned from spiritual teachers. Artists worked with scientists to understand the connection between creativity and healing. Claire Thompson appeared, leading a group of international business leaders on what she called a humanity reminder tour. Her own transformation had inspired many in the corporate world to reconsider their definitions of success. "The numbers people still want proof," she said, joining Marcus and Miguel. "They want guarantees, metrics, ROI calculations." "And what do you tell them?" Marcus asked, though he knew the answer. "I tell them to spend one day in the garden, just one day of letting go of their spreadsheets and opening their hearts." She smiled. "It worked for you, after all." The morning unfolded with its usual rhythm of healing and discovery. Grace moved through the space, now training coordinators for new centers opening across the globe. Each center would be unique, shaped by its community's needs, but all would carry the spirit of this first garden. As the sun climbed higher, Marcus made his way to the small office he kept on the grounds. Unlike his old corporate suite, this space was simple, its windows opening onto the garden. On his desk sat the last spreadsheet he had created in his former life, a probability analysis of his recovery chances. Next to it lay Sophia's first sketch of him, captured on that day when he had finally let go of trying to control everything. The contrast between these two documents told the story of his transformation better than words ever could. A knock at the door revealed the healer, his presence as calm and centered as ever. "They're ready," he said simply. Marcus nodded, gathering himself for the day's most important task. In the garden's main space, a group of healers in training waited, doctors, therapists, counselors, and others who had felt called to this work. They came from different backgrounds, different beliefs, different approaches to healing. But they shared one crucial understanding, that true healing transcended all these differences. "Your greatest tool isn't your knowledge or your techniques," Marcus told them, standing before them with strength that came from vulnerability embraced. "It's your willingness to be present with another person's journey, to hold space for their transformation without trying to control it." As he spoke, he could feel the truth of these words in his own body, in legs that had regained their strength, in a heart that had learned to feel deeply, in a spirit that had found purpose beyond profit. "The garden will teach you what you need to know," he continued, "just as it taught me, but only if you're willing to let go of your certainties and open yourself to possibilities beyond your calculations." The day drew to a close with a gathering in the garden. Anna played the piano, her music carrying all the emotion her hands had rediscovered. Sophia's students displayed their artwork, each piece a window into a soul in the process of healing. Miguel worked with his young mentors, preparing them to carry this work into the future. Marcus stood in the midst of it all, feeling the rightness of this moment, not in his analytical mind, but in the deeper wisdom of his transformed heart. The garden hummed with life around him, each person a testament to the endless possibilities that emerge when we let go of control and open ourselves to the greater healing that awaits us all. "The garden goes on," the healer said softly, standing beside him. "In every heart that opens, in every soul that remembers its wholeness, in every life that touches another with healing. Marcus nodded, understanding now that this was never just about his own healing. It was about creating spaces where others could remember their own capacity to heal and be healed. The garden would continue to grow, not just in physical spaces,